Money, 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 your weekly personal finance date with me, Cerebrovascular. Health insurance in India is set to undergo a major overhaul. The insurance regulator has put in effect its new norms on standardization of health insurance policies. Pre-existing diseases have been very well defined, and there are also clear lists now with respect to exclusions which have been permitted and those which have been disallowed by IRDAI. Today we will be discussing the impact of these important changes, and my guests on the show are Amit Chhabra, Business Head Health Insurance at PolicyBazaar.com, and financial planning expert Harshvardhan Roongta. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. I always feel that perhaps health insurance is the most important financial product or financial instrument that one needs to have, and now what we are seeing is a big change. So let's get first thoughts in. Amit, if I can start with you. Now, I'm assuming these guidelines operationalize a lot of the draft points, the draft that was released by the regulator a couple of months back. Your first thoughts on the manner in which standardization is now coming through?
So Surbhi, I think it's a very welcome step. What the regulator has done is they're trying to make things very transparent and clean for the customers. Earlier there was a bit of a lack of transparency where customers weren't really sure what they were buying, and what it led to was last minute surprises, which typically happens at the time of claim, which is very unpleasant for the customer. So what the regulator has done is they've tried to simplify a lot of these things. So what can be excluded, what cannot be excluded, are permanent exclusions allowed or not. So all of these things have become very clear now. So what that does is it makes things simple, and for somebody who's looking to buy health insurance, they will now not have any last minute surprises.
Okay, fair enough, and we will go step by step through all of those details, exclusions, those that are allowed, those that are not allowed, etc. But Harsh, let me get your opening thoughts as well. I think this is just, a continuation of some of the steps that we've seen from IRDAI in terms of making insurance more customer friendly.
Absolutely, Surbhi. So if you look at the the way health insurance has picked up in our country, one thing very clear is that it is a mandatory requirement in your portfolio. I mean, that we've been always talking about, that make sure even if you have no money left for investments, buy at least health insurance. So the issue was that we look at a lot of rejection of claims. People are not happy with the interpretations. They got a shock at the end of it when they bought a policy. They were told something else. They believed something else, and at the time of claim, another story, another picture came up suddenly. So the question then arises is, as a regulator, of course, you will want to make things as much as possible. You want to standardize it, saying that there should be no room for ambiguity. There should be no interpretational issues. So definitely, it's a very welcome step, wherein you're saying specifically which 16 pre-existing ailments will be excluded permanently from the policy, what will not be excluded, what you're going to give into the coverage. So now it is going to be standardized all across different companies.
Sure.
Now, until now, you would see every company would have their own methodology to design a policy.
And a lot of sort of ambiguity perhaps, and therefore also a difference of opinion and interpretation, which should be now a thing of the past. Amit, first and foremost, now when do these guidelines come into effect? Because it says that they are operational from 1st October 2020. So does anything change right now in the current year or not?
It does actually. So any new products which are approved by the regulators starting 1st October 2019, which is already live, all of those will be, all these new guidelines will be applicable to them. However, as we understand, right, these are complicated things. So every insurer has to make certain changes in the products which are currently existing. So which means all the products which are currently in the market, which are currently being sold by insurance companies in the market, all of them will be required to be modified to a certain extent to conform with these guidelines. So the regulator is given a timeline of a year. So till 1st October 2020, all the existing products have to conform to these new guidelines.
Okay, so that's the important thing to keep in mind, that your existing policy will also undergo a change. If you choose not to buy a new policy, and if you want to stay with your current insurer, then after 1 year, these changes will reflect even in your current policy. Now let's start, take it step by step and start by understanding how things will evolve. Starting first with, if you're buying a policy, let's say you want to buy a new product in the market, which is going to be in conformity with these new norms. First and foremost, we need to know what happens to pre-existing illnesses, right? Because only when you declare pre-existing ailments does it get decided whether you get the policy or not. So what changes here, Harsh?
So the first thing is, if you're applying for a new policy right now, you have to mandatorily fill up all the details in your proposal form, whatever has been asked. So it does not mean that you are absorbed of the liability or the responsibility of declaring what your health condition is.
Sure.
So you will fill up the form absolutely with utmost good faith, giving all the information as it is. Now what has happened is there are 16 predefined exclusions, permanently excluded ailments, which have been allowed by the regulator in the insurance policy itself. So what happens is, if you were, say, suppose you had suffered with cancer a couple of years ago. Now if you had gone to apply for a new one today, you would never get the policy itself. How about a condition that, okay, the insurer can exclude cancer permanently throughout the policy period and at least cover me for non-cancer related treatments.
Okay.
So that has been now added into the policy as well. So the regulator has very clearly said that there are certain permanent exclusions, which are 16 defined by the regulator now. Anything else, and anything else, I mean, you could still insure the person without those exclusions.
Okay, all right, got it. Amit, I want to get your thoughts in on this as well, because the definition of a pre-existing disease has also been, clearly stated in the new norms. It says that if there is any diagnosis by a physician 48 months prior to the effective date of the policy starting, or any medical advice or treatment that you've been getting 48 months again prior to the policy starting, then that becomes a pre-existing condition, a pre-existing disease that one must declare?
Yes, that is correct. So there are two clauses to this. One is, if, as you said, if somebody has a disease which was diagnosed, or you were being treated for it at least in the last 4 years or 48 months, then that must be declared in the proposal form as a pre-existing disease. Additionally, so the new difference that's come out in the guidelines is, additionally, if after issuance of the policy there is something that's been diagnosed within the next 90 days or 3 months, that also gets classified as a pre-existing disease. So just to give you a simple illustration, let's say if I am a customer who bought a policy and within 90 days I get diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes or a heart ailment, that will also be classified as a pre-existing disease. So the waiting period for a pre-existing disease will apply to this condition as well.
So I'm just going to read out some of the diseases that were mentioned in the draft, Amit, and tell me if these are the pre-existing conditions that an insurer can say that I'm not covering you for these pre-existing conditions. And some of these were epilepsy, heart ailment, and stroke disease, chronic liver disease, chronic kidney disease, hepatitis B, HIV/AIDS. Are these pretty much the diseases that are forming part of the list of pre-existing?
The list, Subi, that you're referring to right now is, I think, the list of permanent exclusions that are now allowed. So again, let me give you some context. So there are two things. One is issuing a policy or not issuing a policy. That still remains a prerogative with the insurance company. Based on their underwriting norms, they may decide to issue a policy or not. So let's say there is one insurance company which does not take any diabetes specific cases at all, whereas there's another one which takes diabetes, as in they issue a policy to the customer who has diabetes. So that still remains. That is an underwriting prerogative for the insurance company. What you were referring to is exclusions or permanent exclusions in this specific case. So earlier in the guidelines which are existing prior to the new guidelines, there was a bit of lack of clarity if an insurance company can put permanent exclusions or not. Now what does a permanent exclusion mean? It essentially means that the insurance company says that we will issue you the policy and we will cover for everything except these defined specific illnesses based on a consent from the customer. So as Harshvardhan was saying, in case a customer comes in who has had cancer and was treated for cancer 2 years back, insurance company can say that we will cover you for everything, but we will not cover you for cancer. Okay. If the customer agrees to it, and again, this is only on customer consent, this is important, only on customer consent, if the customer agrees, then the insurance company will issue this policy to the customer. They will cover everything, but they will not cover cancer. So if this person suffers from, say, diabetes or a heart ailment later on after buying the policy, that will be covered.
Got it, Amit. So yeah, I think what's the important takeaway here is that if you're going to opt for one of these new products, it's very important to go through the fine print and make sure you're very clear with the insurance company in terms of what is the permanent exclusion, what is the illness that you will get covered for or not. Anyway, we've just covered half of the big guidelines. We'll take a break and come back and talk about certain exclusions that have been disallowed. So earlier companies could actually say that these are exclusions, they will not cover them, but this has not been upheld by the insurance regulator anymore. So it's good news for customers. We discuss this after the break. watching Money, 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 and this is a very, very important conversation that we are having on the show this week because it's all about the changes that are going to govern health insurance products in the market starting today. All the new policies will be different, and even your existing policy is going to be different come the 1st of October 2020. There are standardization guidelines that have been applied by the IRDAI. Let's keep the conversation going. Now, Harsh, I want to come to the other aspect of it. You know, earlier there were exclusions that an insurance company could cite even after the policy has been taken and the waiting period is over, saying that these are exclusions. But now that seems to be changing, and I saw one of the interesting ones was, for instance, hazardous activities. Earlier it was a blanket ban, I think, or a company could, insurers could, sort of say that I'm not covering it, but now they will have to.
Yeah, so this is more like an occupational hazard. So if there is a person who is a driver by profession, and obviously by the virtue of him being on the road, there's a possibility of an accident which could possibly lead to hospitalization. So a company would say that due to certain occupational hazards, I would not want to insure you. Because, or if you're working in mines, for example, so you're susceptible to hospitalization, which is more than a person who's working on a desk job. So occupational hazards, so hazardous activities are now being covered. So they're saying in case you venture into adventure sports like bungee jumping, etc., then you can, all the injuries and illnesses all relating to hazardous activities are covered, but adventure sports can be excluded.
So if you get hospitalized, God forbid, because you decide to go bungee jumping or indulge in other such activities, then that might still not be covered by your insurance policy. Purely
based on your occupation that you follow. I mean, that cannot be excluded now.
Okay. There are a couple of other interesting exclusions as well. Amit, comment on this, because I think another point of debate was people who are suffering from some sort of mental ailment, or perhaps they're undergoing some form of treatment for depression. Will they stand a chance to get insurance cover now?
Yes, so I think that's one of the bigger things that have also come out of these guidelines, that anything related to mental illnesses, stress, or any psychological disorder, all of this also gets covered now. Earlier, again, it was clarified at the time of buying a policy itself that this will not be covered because this was not considered to be a physical health condition. However, now with the new guidelines, these are placed at par with any physical health condition. So essentially, which means that if a customer has to get treated for depression, for example, that will get covered as a part of the health insurance policy.
Just on the point of exclusions, this age-related macular degeneration, I'm not too sure, what sort of an ailment this is, but it's definitely age-related degeneration or disorder. Amit, my question is that does anything change generally for senior citizens under these new norms, or even as you're aging? Could the company earlier start excluding some of the conditions, and does that get plugged? Does that loophole get plugged with these new rules?
It does actually. So think of it, right? I bought a health insurance policy, say 10 years back. What has happened over the last 10 years is a lot of new kind of treatments have come in, or even a lot of new kind of diseases have now become more prevalent. So earlier these could be potentially excluded by the insurance company. However, now what's done is very clearly, it's been clearly defined what all can be excluded or not. So for example, artificial life maintenance, it was probably not as common 10 years back, but now it is very, very common. So that earlier was not covered probably by a lot of companies, but now that gets covered very clearly. So it said that artificial life maintenance cannot be excluded. Similarly, modern treatment methods such as robotic surgeries, which earlier didn't exist, are now available, but again, a lot of the health insurance policies don't cover them, because once the expenses are high, secondly, it's almost like an optional treatment available for the customer, but these are good for the customer also. So again, what the guidelines now say is new methods like robotic surgeries will have to be covered by the insurance companies. They cannot be excluded.
Okay, got it. So therefore, generally speaking, in a positive direction for the consumer. Now I want to come to this point, and the very important point of the subsument of charges, because we all know and we've all dealt with this, that even after having a good Mediclaim cover, there will always be something additional on the bill that I will have to pay for. And I'm not even talking about the copay clause, but in general there will be charges that are not covered by the insurance policy. Now I see a couple of annexures here in this particular release which talk about a lot of costs that need to be subsumed in room charges and treatment charges. So explain this to us, please.
When you look at your hospital bill, of course, there are room charges, then there are certain other costs along with it. Then there is an operation theatre charge, then there is a doctor, etc. And then there is a hospital surcharge, if at all.
So, there's a dietitian charge as well.
Yeah, a dietitian charge as well. So, you would have all these charges in your bill. Now, not necessarily all those charges are going to be reimbursed or taken care by the Mediclaim policy. So, anything which is non-medical in nature would definitely be excluded. So, the registration charges would not be paid by the insurance company, saying this has nothing to do with your medical treatment. Hospital would say, I would need to charge you a registration fee of say 200, 500, whatever amount. So like this, there were two different parameters, functioning independently. Now what IRD has done by its circular said that there are certain charges which will be included as room charges. So which means from an insurance company point of view, so if you've been charged for say hand wash, by your hospital, the insurance company will say this is subsumed as a part of room charges. So if your room charge is say 5,000 rupees and you've been charged separately for a hand wash, so insurance company will say room charges I'm paying because it is supposed to be a part of room charges.
Now they can't do that. Hand wash is part of the room charges category.
So which
not just hand wash, let me actually read out. It has a couple of other interesting items as well. There are caps, there are cradle charges, comb, footwear, gowns, slippers. A lot of these were basically seen as add-ons, and it was for the patient to pay for them. That won't be the case now?
No, it remains to be the case even today unless the hospital does not put it as a part of room charges. So from an insurance company's point of view, the insurance company will say, I'm paying you room charges, and room charges are supposed to include all
of this. Yes.
All of this.
Yes.
So while you're paying 5,000 as room charges, the hospital may charge you 5,000 plus these things.
Okay.
So now they've very categorically said that there is no dispute on this. So what you have to do is eventually ask the hospital not to charge you these things.
For tissue paper, toothpaste, toothbrush, face mask, all of this hopefully shouldn't be a separate item on your bill. But that's something.
But if it is going to be there, then you have to bear it yourself. The insured will have to bear it. The insurance company will not pay you.
We just hope that the medical fraternity, the whole system comes together and realizes if this is the direction that the regulator wants to go in, then we can only hope for the best.
So in fact, what the regulator has done in this case has asked all the insurance companies to license with the network hospitals at least to make sure that this is not separately charged.
Okay.
So an insurance company is now going to sit down with the hospitals which are on the network and tell them that we are going to pay you room charges and then please do not charge anything else.
Got it.
For non-network hospitals, then it will be licensing based on, on request basis to say that please don't do it.
Got it. Lots of big changes coming up, and generally if I think if the letter and spirit of this regulation is followed, it should be good news for all the policy holders out there. We take another break. Coming up on the other side, what happens to costs? Yes, a lot more can be covered, but then what will happen to premiums? We'll discuss that on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching Money, 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 and we are discussing all the new changes that are going to sweep across the health insurance landscape in India. Lots of diseases get added. Basically, they will get covered, so the coverage will increase. There's a lot of standardization. Amit, what is your most important takeaway from all of this? And then it comes to the big question. Will it all come at a higher price? By how much do you think will premiums go up?
The biggest takeaway is things are now getting standardized, they're getting simpler, they're getting easier for the customers to understand. You buy from any insurance company, the policy documents will look similar, the exclusions would be very similar. So all this does is it builds more and more trust for the customer in the entire health insurance ecosystem, be it the hospitals, be it the health insurers, be it the TPAs who are involved. It makes things simpler, easier, and I think this will increase the penetration of health insurance significantly.
What about the cost, Amit?
Price specifically, yes, the prices might increase a bit. So that is something, to be honest, that will be played out over the next 1 year as all these products are filed again. So this is something that the insurance companies will work on. I think there are two ways, there are pros and cons of these guidelines. So while all these new coverages or exclusion lists, these should make the product more expensive. At the same time, there's one big point here. Permanent exclusions are now allowed, which were earlier, there was no clarity on them. So with permanent exclusions being allowed, it actually helps insurance companies manage the profitability much better. Exactly how much do pricing change? We'll get clarity, I think, over the next year, as I said. But yeah, it shouldn't be that prices double up or increase by 50%. Even if they do, my sense it will be a 10-15% increment at maximum.
Final thoughts, Harsh, with you as well. My only concern was that, yes, permanent exclusions have been very clearly defined. So you can say that if someone has a cancer condition, as you mentioned, don't cover cancer, cover for everything else. I'm just hoping as a customer or as a policy holder that it plays out transparently, because if you start saying that, oh, this condition resulted from that permanently excluded condition, whether it's heart or whether it's diabetes, then you can go on rejecting claims, across the board. So one hopes that that won't be a...
No, in fact, if you see the regulations again, they have been very specifically mentioning this, stating that you cannot exclude saying that this was related to an X disease, or you have to be very specific.
Okay.
So you cannot give a reason to say that it's excluded because this could have happened out of pre-existing ailment linked to something else.
Right.
So in fact, the regulations have also been very specifically mentioning that.
Okay.
So you cannot just write etc. So sometimes you would just write anything relating to diabetes and etc. and treatments relating to thereof.
Okay, so it's not very loosely sort of worded, anything can be excluded.
Yeah, so IRDA has ensured that at least, the reasons for rejection are also very specific and not vague. Any exclusions, if you're making for a 4-year period or permanently, you can't just simply say etc. and related to.
Yeah, which covers like, 80% of the universe maybe.
Absolutely. So if you have diabetes, everything in your body can be related to diabetes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you cannot say diabetes and, all ailments
related
thereof.
conditions,
So that has been again trying to be plugged in.
That's fantastic. That's very good.
But however, any regulations that come out are more in letter and spirit. I mean, they're supposed to be even accepted in spirit. So let's hope that insurance companies also, accept it with spirit and in the right, in the right attitude.
Absolutely. I think that's sound advice. Gentlemen, thank you very much for demystifying what is probably one of the most important regulatory pieces that we've seen in the last 12 months or so. Health insurance is critical, it is vital, and now we know that it will be more widely available, covering, of course, a wider gamut of conditions. Thanks very much for joining in. We hope this conversation has been useful to our viewers as well. Do send us your feedback, your comments and your queries. We will keep getting you more themes and more conversations. We'll come back to you next week.